To go more in depth, we're joined by Scott Neal, a retired Master Sergeant and veteran of the Special Forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Pete Hoesktra, my former colleague in the House of Representatives, where he served as the chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence. To both you gentlemen, thanks for Skyping in. And Pete, let's begin with you. We hear Eric Holder saying, oh, he's known about the Khorasan group for 2 years. Publicly, we haven't heard a lot. First, really, I heard of them. What do you know about the Khorasan group?
Well, we don't know very much. I think, as someone indicated yesterday who was in the know, they said, this was the first time that they'd ever heard of them. So this particular group I don't know a lot about. But what we do know a lot about, JD, is the ideology. And whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's al-Nusra, whether it's this group or some other group, the ideology is a threat. This ideology we've always known has been fragmented. The president has said Al-Qaeda, and by extension, that the ideology is on the run. The president now is actually engaging in the war that he inherited from President Bush. The only thing is he's run from it for almost 6 years. He now has to re-engage America because we've got to keep pressure on this group and groups like it each and every day. We can't walk away from it for 6 years like we've done.
And Pete, I want to get back to some of the political fallout in just a minute. But first, let me get to Scott and talk about the assets of the Khorasan group. We're hearing these are battle-tested guys who've been senior operatives in the past with Al-Qaeda. Your take on it, Scott?
Certainly, and it poses a bigger question, which I don't hear a lot about, is where is the Jihad VFW? A lot of these guys are leaving the battlefield. Certainly, we were opposing foes when I was a young Green Beret. They left the battlefield. They'll spend a little bit of time at home, and then they'll start self-organizing again. And they have all of this knowledge and these ideas. They understand our tactics. And what you saw was a strike against an older group that came together. They self-organized, and really it was their knowledge that needed to be destroyed because their knowledge was about IEDs and how to penetrate American defenses.
Pete, let me get back to you on another piece of intelligence that had a direct bearing on air travel here this past summer. Remember, we'd go through those lines at TSAs. They'd say, hey, does that cell phone work? Does your laptop, in fact, turn on? We now know some of those new questions were tied to suspicions about Khorasan. Do we have any intelligence on what they may have been planning?
Well, it appears that, from the indications and the people that I've talked to, again, they wanted to get bomb materials on airplanes, and they wanted to be able to take down airplanes. Not a whole lot different than what, we saw from the Yemeni branch of Al-Qaeda a few years ago. And there's every indication that they may have been working with the folks in that area who have the expertise. These groups communicate, they share technology, they share strategies, and those types of things. And I think we do ourselves a great disservice when we focus on one group versus another and those types of things. We really need to take a look at this threat in its totality if we're going to contain it and ultimately defeat it.
Well, we heard this was imminent. Is it too early, Pete, to call this a victory for our much maligned intelligence community, at least in terms of saying we're aware of this threat and here are the steps we took to stop it?
Well, if the intelligence community has, kept their fingers on the pulse of this group for the last 2 years, yes, it's our hats off to the intelligence community. I have to question the leadership. If they've been in a planning mode for the last 2 years, as it appears the Attorney General has been claiming, my question is, why did we let them plan for 2 years and wait till it's imminent? Stop the threat early in the process, stop the planning and those types of things. Take this threat out as soon as you've identified it.
Pete, some political fallout, some criticism. Yesterday, our former colleague David Vitter, now in the Senate, basically said he had his suspicions that the administration could have been crying wolf about Khorasan. And then earlier today, we had Mike Hayden on saying the temptation to run from shiny object to shiny object among these terror groups could be a real problem. Valid criticism from those two gentlemen?
Possibly. And, I think Juan Williams the other day said, there's going to be an October surprise for Republicans because of, all of this war talk today and a rallying around the president. I was a victim of, a October surprise back in 2012 when America was attacked because of a video that we produced. In reality, it was total incompetence. But, a president has a great way to shape public opinion, at least for a short period of time, to get maximum political benefit, perhaps for something like an election.
Well, you and I have had our experience in elections, but the one thing about that is you can finish second and come back another day. Scott, you have been in real fights with real bad guys who shoot real bullets and have real bombs. Militarily, are we better off right now with these airstrikes going on than we were, say, a couple of weeks ago?
I believe so, because what you see with the military airstrikes is you're creating panic, lack of command and control. You're basically flushing out a lot of the people that have been hidden. And now that you're seeing where everybody scatters, how they communicate, you can start targeting them. Because and we talked about this earlier, once you stop momentum and you make them react to your deliberate actions, you are now in control.
Obviously, over the past couple of days, we've placed all this attention on the Khorasan group and almost anticipating the criticism we heard earlier this morning from Mike Hayden and just now from Pete Hoesktra. Rear Admiral John Kirby in his press briefing said, hey, we're also keeping our eyes on ISIS. Let's take a listen, then get you to react.
There's no way that a group like this is going to, obviously survive with this brutal ideology that they espouse. And we do think that they are further isolating themselves simply by virtue of how they conduct themselves. That doesn't mean they're less dangerous, doesn't mean we're taking our eye off it, doesn't mean we can get lazy here. They still pose a significant threat to our interests in the region, to our people, to our facilities, and eventually they have global aspirations, eventually possibly a threat to the homeland.
Well, interesting to hear Rear Admiral Kelly talk about possibly a threat to the homeland when earlier reporting said imminent. Your reaction, Pete Hoekstra?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting, saying that this is a group that's marginalizing itself, that for the long term it can't survive because of its radical thinking and those types of things. Excuse me, these people have captured a large swath of territory in Syria and Iraq. They've established the Islamic Caliphate. They are charging taxes. They are selling oil. This doesn't sound like a group that is kind of marginalizing and is on the fringe and is on the decline. This is a group that has been in the ascendancy for the last couple of years. And for us to downplay this threat, this is how we got into the problem in the first place.
Less than 2 minutes remain. Scott Neal, your thoughts on what we heard out of Rear Admiral Kirby?
Well, I think one thing to be cautious about is not chasing the name of ISIS. It's really the people and the ideology behind that we need to defeat. So hitting a few targets by the air, it makes for a great video, but there's some personalities and there's some ideas behind this, and we really need to crush them, and we have to crush them fast.
There is a new acronym in our military talk now passing along to us. We used to talk about lone wolves. Now we have the acronym HVEs, homegrown violent extremist. In about a minute's time, let me split in 30 seconds for both of you. Scott, what about the threat of these HVEs?
Very real, very possible. Worry about acts of mass violence.
And to you, Pete. Good, Pete.
I think he's absolutely right. The threat is not only to the United States. I worry a lot about Europe. Libya's been off the radar screen for a period of time, but Libya provides an awesome access for radical jihadists with Western roots to go back into Europe and go to the United States. It is a real threat.
Pete Hoekstra, Scott Neal, gentlemen, we thank you for your insights. We will be visiting again in short order. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, JD.
Well, you heard what Pete and Scott had to say. What do you have to say? The threat of lone wolves or homegrown violent extremists? Like to get your comments. Why don't you tweet them to me at NewsmaxTV, hashtag America's Forum. There's also newsmaxtv.com/comment. And don't forget Facebook, facebook.com/Newsmax. We're coming right back.